Hi everyone, welcome back. We are going to move on with our talk about some of the model view controller that I talked about in the last video for the lecture. So this is going to lead into a discussion about inputs, but I wanted to kind of highlight some of these ideas, particularly as they relate to how we're going to be thinking about PS2. So in the last video, I suggested how we might think about the PS2 problem in terms of the MVC, but I didn't want to reveal any of the answers for the code there. So I do want to take a little bit of time to think about this MVC in terms of a HTML, CSS, JavaScript connection here. I'm going to use a tic-tac-toe board as an example. And the one caveat I'll say here is that the model and the view actually aren't really explicitly separated in the code, but we can look at the way that they have this design to kind of think in those sort of terms. So it's a really simplified MVC approach. So you'll kind of have to bear with me and suspend a little disbelief if you really know what's going on here. But I think it's going to help me really illustrate the points here. So the big idea that we talked about in the last video and that we've been really hammering home is that your job in this UI side of things is to really be thinking about this view and then how to get information from the model into and be represented in the view, and then how to handle input events that are going to be handled basically through the controller that will update the model, or to kind of, you can directly update the view as well based on those things as well. Okay. So the example I said I want to look at today is a tic-tac-toe board that I have some code that we can share and look at here. And so the controller for that basically is going to be some JavaScript that handles the logic of what to do about each turn for this tic-tac-toe game, how to update the model, the inner HTML is the model really here, and then how to check for the winner of the game as it goes on, and then update the state of the game as to whose turn it is, X or 0. So that's all the logic we'll look into there, and that's the controller side of things. And then the model, like I said, is really integrated really into the view code here, but it still serves as a model. And there's a couple of different pieces of that. One is what piece is in each box, the tic-tac-toe board that we can see here. Other parts of the model is whose turn it is, and then we can also kind of check the model to see if anybody would be a winner at that point. Okay, so let's dive into that code. And let's see, I can show you. Yeah, here it is. All right, so here's the game. And it's just a blank board, and you can see that this, again, is just a representation of this sort of model backend, which right now is a blank tic-tac-toe board, right? So this is what a user would expect to see. The model doesn't care what the user really sees. The model is just what it is. And then one thing that we have where the controller is going to directly update the view is going to be for some of these hovers. So when we hover over any of these boxes, you'll see that it turns gray, and we switch from a arrow to a pointer. And that's where we actually are using the view and the controller in direct connection to update these things. And so let's look at the code under the hood for some of that stuff. It's all handled by the CSS. And essentially, when we get to this hover section here, this is where it changes the background for the boxes. And you also get the cursor, whenever the cursor goes over a box, that's going to change to a pointer. Okay, and so all the CSS really is being used to the event really is where the cursor is on the screen. And it's sort of a simplified event handling where the CSS really sort of automatically does listening for these sort of things to do those updates. Okay, so if you do the YouTube channel that I have set up for you to look at some of the CSS stuff, they're going to go into the details about all the sort of nomenclature and how all these CSS names are related to the HTML bits themselves. Really quickly, this span and button, these are all things that are, those are tags, so that you don't have to put any identifier before them, you just kind of name them. So, but what we're doing is anything that's a span tag is going to have these attributes. If it has a dot, these are all classes. So a container class and a box class are going to have these attributes. And the name, the ID for an element in HTML, we're always going to start with a hash symbol, but we don't have any name ones here. Okay, so you can see that we set up the button style. Again, that's a tag, so we don't have to have any precursor there. And this is all the sort of display information for that. And then the .win, this is a class that will sort of change this background here as well. Okay, so this is all the style stuff, the CSS stuff that's happening here that really sort of relates to the view, what the view is actually going to look like. And then this is where we have the sort of main elements where, for the most part, this is where our model lives in this programming. You can see right now in the model, there's nothing in any of the boxes. And so in our view, there's nothing in any of the boxes. And then we have this event listener for on click for the replay button to reset everything. And again, what this would do is when you do this and click on the replay button that says play again, the replay is essentially going to reset the model back to empty boxes. Okay, and so I won't go into any of this detail here, but I do want to point out the way that we kind of do some of these listeners here are for clicking on the boxes. We're going to be looking at the inner HTML. If there isn't an X or an O already in that box, then we're going to do some logic here and essentially either update it with an X and change the state so that it's zero's turn now, or the other way around, we can update it with adding an O into the model and then update the state so that it's X turns now, and then these will both be represented back out in the view. Okay, so to go back to our board, we can look at the source for the element, or if you do inspect element, you can look at the code here. And you can see then that when we click here, this box 1 is represented in the model right here on this line. So when we click there, the model now puts an X in the inner HTML, and the view puts this big large X out for your user to see. Okay. And then the same thing essentially for any of these other boxes. Oh yeah, the other state that we do update, the 0 turn or O turn now. This is the state of the game that's in the model, and then our view is representing this to our users in a slightly different way. Okay, so all these interactions that happen here are going to be updating the model, and then based on the model, we update the view, and the controller is handling all the inputs. So when we do an on click, that event handling will update the model and subsequently update the view. Okay, and so then if we set this up, I got to figure out how to get a winner here. Let's see, an X, and then we can put an O here, and an X over there, right? And so then again, the game logic, the back end, the model is representing what's happening here, and then the view is updated because we have this 3 in a row now. Okay, so the whole logic here is that we have these sort of separation of roles. There's a view part, a controller part, and a model part, and your job for the most part is to set up the view in the controller for PS2, and the model is in most ways already set up for you. That's the relatively simple part of that thing. Okay, so to illustrate that one last time for you, again, the view, clicks and events that are happening in that view are input events that impact the controller. The logic here will update the model, and when that O is added into the model here as the inner HTML, then that in turn is going to update the view. And you just have this sort of continuous cycle of relationships between view, controller, and model. Hopefully this was a good simplified version for you to kind of get a sense for what that looks like. And again, from the first video for today, if you look at PS2, we have that same relationship here going. So don't get too far in the weeds. You don't need to recreate the model. Most of that's already there for you. Your job is to work on the view and the controller. So hopefully that was a good refresher on MVC in terms of our class project here. And if you have questions about this that remain, definitely encourage you to come to the lab session on Wednesday, because that's going to be really helpful. Or throw some questions into Piazza. That's a really great place to get some feedback from me and the TAs, but also from your classmates who might be pretty well versed in some of this stuff as well. So happy to help as much as I can on PS2 as you guys are working on this. And in the next video, we're going to start talking about inputs. I'll see you then.